Thanks so much for being here. You've campaigned as an outsider in this race, and critics have said that's an understatement, pointing to voting records in Illinois showing you casting ballots in Chicago as recently as 2020. How can you assure voters in Missouri that you're invested in Missouri?
Yeah, well, I was born and raised in Springfield, Missouri. I live here today with my family in Springfield. But the truth of the matter is, I wouldn't be in this race unless I qualified to run for governor in the state of Missouri. And I care deeply about the state of Missouri. I've grown a family-owned business from 26 locations to almost 200. We employ over 2,000 people here in the state of Missouri. And I built many of the 50 locations that we have here in the state, building relationships with people in various communities throughout the state, even beyond the 50 communities that we're in here today. So I care deeply about the state. I think the state has a great future and a bright future, and that's why I'm running for governor.
Mm-hmm. Live here in Missouri and,
yes.
and have for the last decade, I think that's the rule?
Yes, that's
mm-hmm.
right.
All right. Yeah. You've never held elected office before, but you arguably want the biggest office that Missouri has to offer. Why should voters pick you?
Yeah, so like I said, I think the state has a great opportunity and a bright future, but we're also, encumbered with a lot of challenges. People are still challenged with trying to make ends meet in this state, and that's frustrating as a Missourian to see and watch that. For the last 22 years, I've laid out a vision and grown a business working with people that I might not always agree with to build a great company. And being able to bring people together. And I know that's what Missouri needs right now. They need somebody who's willing to go to work with people, irrespective of their political affiliation, to try to move things forward and solve problems. And I'm someone who's relentless around solving problems. I won't stop until we solve problems and until we make progress in our business, and I'll do the exact same thing for people in the state of Missouri.
What's the biggest issue in Missouri right now, in your opinion?
Yeah, the biggest issue that we have right now is the extreme abortion ban that we have in place. And I'm confident that we're going to have that ballot initiative in November. I'm confident that we're going to restore that right for women in the state of Missouri. But we're going to need to have a Democratic governor to ensure we keep that right in place.
And I mean, we've seen the pushback from the General Assembly as well. If you take the executive in Missouri, you may still be up against a Republican-run House and Senate. How do you make that work, and how do you try to keep those rights in place? Obviously, if this abortion amendment passes, it's enshrined in the Constitution. That hasn't stopped politicians in Kansas, let's say, from trying to put further restrictions on abortions.
That's right. We'll work. Like I said, I'm going to work with anybody, and I'll work hard to make sure we keep those rights in place, and I'll work with our legislative body to do that. And in places where they've decided they're going to just stonewall us in that effort, then we'll work to replace them. We'll work to find other candidates that will be elected to the House or the Senate that are going to work with an executive branch to try to bring change and bring progress to the state of Missouri. It's not just good for women's rights in the state of Missouri to restore that, but it's also good for our future. I talk to parents and grandparents every day that tell me their kids aren't willing to move back to the state of Missouri, and they're concerned about their grandchildren leaving the state of Missouri because of this extreme abortion ban. So it's impacting our economy, it's impacting our future and our ability to keep people here in the state of Missouri right now.
You've discussed the need, you talk about gridlock, you've discussed the need to stop the partisan food fighting, I think you said.
Yes.
How do you do that when historically there's just been gridlock constantly in Jeff City? As governor, how would you try to break that up?
Yeah, one of the reasons I'm running is because for the last 22 years, I have brought people together to solve problems, to confront challenges, and I'm relentless about it. And I know that I'll do that same thing as governor. And if there is stonewalling, the legislators decide, or there's people in the legislative body that decide to stonewall efforts to try to make progress in the state, then we'll bring those initiatives to the voters. We'll bring it back to the voters and let them make those decisions.
What's your take on the General Assembly trying to change the voter threshold for those initiative petition measures? Well,
they're trying to take rights away from voters here in the state of Missouri. We have a current threshold. They should leave that alone. They should leave that in place because that's the will of the people. The people want that, have agreed for that threshold, and they should absolutely leave that in place and not mess with it.
Let's talk about just the economy. I mean, inflation may be easing on paper, right? But you go to the grocery store or the gas pump, you can really still feel the pain there when you go to pay. How, as governor, would you try to help Missourians just pay their bills and live?
Yeah, well, I've just today I released a plan, a policy plan. It's a 42-page plan to talk about how I'm going to impact the state and what I'm going to do. The first point policy in that plan is to grow our economy. Make this economy work for everyone. Secondly, it's about supporting people in the state of Missouri. Easing costs, reducing the cost of living here in the state. So making investments back in education, making investments in healthcare, so that we can grow the economy and help people out in the state of Missouri. And third, it's about ensuring that we reform our government and support the employees in the state government to ensure that they're providing the services that people in the state pay for.
Your company employs some 7,000 plus workers.
7,400, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Missouri is a much larger business, I guess, if you could
Sure.
say, 35,000 workers and staffers. How do you translate your business experience to running an entire government in the state?
Yeah, I think it's very different. I think, you have the legislative branch, but then you also have an executive branch. And a governor is responsible for the duties in the executive branch. Part of that is legislating, but there's another huge piece of being an executive in government and running the state. And that is about being responsible for the employees in the state, being responsible and holding people accountable to the services they provide, and ensuring you're doing other things to help the state grow its economy, impacting education by supporting that and making investments back in our education so our kids can get a great public school education, and also making sure that we have the health care that we need throughout the state to make it affordable and accessible and quality health care throughout the entire state.
There's an issue close to home in Kansas City, and that has to do with the state control of the police department here.
Yes.
We know there's a fight in St. Louis to maybe bring back state control. Do you support state control of local police departments? What would you do as governor in this whole KCPD battle?
Sure. Well, first off, let me just say this. The voters in these communities throughout the Missouri, they elect the mayors to make those decisions. They put elected officials in place to make decisions about what safety is going to look like, how they're going to manage law enforcement agencies in those various communities. I think it's disruptive for the state to be involved in Kansas City's decision making around law enforcement and how they're going to manage and govern their police force. We need to ensure that that is put back into the state, back into Kansas City, back into the hands of the mayor and the people that have been elected as officials in Kansas City. They know their community best. The state does not know as much about what's happening in the city of Kansas City as the people that are elected in that city.
Would you support or lead an effort to bring local control back to Kansas City?
Yes.
Okay. We talk about gun violence all the time here in Kansas City, and we see that in St. Louis as well.
Yes.
It's a major problem here, a public health crisis, according to some health experts. What do you do to try and curb those numbers?
Well, I think, all majority of Missourians, including gun owners like myself, support stronger background checks, as well as red flag laws here in the state of Missouri. It's not just good for the safety of people walking out on the streets, but it's also supporting our law enforcement agencies so they're protected when they're walking into situations that they're not aware of. There may be a violent, person in there that has the right to own a gun. And that's something red flag laws would help our law enforcement agencies out with as well.
How do you get that through the General Assembly, which is typically ultra-conservative in some such, at least Republican-led, you could say?
Yeah, I'll work with anybody in the General Assembly to move that forward. And like I said, the majority of people in the state of Missouri, including gun owners, want to see stronger background checks. They want to see the even conservative red flag laws put into the state of Missouri. We have to convince them to do that. And if they're unwilling to do that, then we will, again, bring that back to the voters in the state of Missouri through a ballot initiative. We
mentioned reproductive rights, which is a huge issue, a tentpole issue in Missouri this year.
Yes.
With that November vote coming, potentially, it looks like it's on track to happen here for the Constitutional Amendment Initiative petition. Does that help other Democrats, not just in the race for governor, the makeup of the House and Senate potentially? How are you looking at this issue affecting the state of politics and the makeup of the parties in Jeff City?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's going to galvanize people to come out and vote. I think people are going to be engaged very differently in this election cycle, given that that is such a critical issue for people in the state of Missouri. And I think it's going to help people up and down the ballot. And I think that we will shift the supermajorities that we have in the legislative body right now this year. I'm confident that we can do that. But having a Democratic lead the party, having a Democrat in the general election that can win against a Republican is going to shift the entire slate of people running up and down the ballot.
All right, we'll be watching closely. Mike Hammer, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.